Good morning, aspirants. It's 28th of November today, and I welcome you all on today's series of What to Read in the Hindu newspaper. I'm 𝗗𝗶𝗹𝘆 𝗡𝗲𝗄𝐺, Senior Mentor at Prepp IAS. I'm here to align your newspaper reading as a part of our syllabus, wherein we will not only try to interlink all the respective themes with their GS papers, but also look at several peripheral areas as well. So let's get started. The very first article there in the paper and that catches our attention is about IMF gives C grade for India's national accounts statistics. So this has been one of the most important topics wherein it is relevant for GS paper 3, economy, national accounting and data reliability. IMF has tried to emphasize issues based on outdated base year data, as we are still following 2011-2012 data, and also the wholesale price indexes rather than producer price indexes for measuring deflators, and discrepancies between production and expenditure approach of measuring GDP. That often indicates possible undercoverage of informal sector and weaker expenditure side data. It is relevant with regard to national accounting, economic planning, fiscal policy, and resource reallocation. For prelims perspective, the arenas that we have to read and revise is about knowing GDP, what is GVA, base year, deflator, production versus expenditure approach, knowing about national account statistics methodology, which all criterias or gradings have been devised by IMF so far, or need for robust data system for inclusive growth and apt measurement to illustrate good economic standards. So this is how this particular article is to be seen. The next important article there in the paper and that catches our attention talks about Supreme Court asks government to regulate user content on internet. So this is relevant for GS paper 2 under the theme polity and governance, wherein digital media regulations, freedom of speech versus reasonable restrictions, evolving challenges in cyberspace has been discussed about. Also, for prelims perspective, we need to know about the flagship judgments like Shreya Singhal case of 2015, striking down of 66A of IT Act. At the same time, IT rules of 2021, these are things that we have to revise. For mains perspective, the same article is to be seen through the lens of balancing right of free speech and protection of individual right, role of regulators and regulations, state versus private intermediaries, cyber governance framework, and this is how this is to be seen. At the same time, the key theme that has been emphasized in this article talks about Supreme Court had asked the government to frame guidelines for user-generated content to protect innocence from obscene, defamatory, or anti-national content that spreads rapidly. Right? So this is how this particular article is to be seen. The next important article that we have in our paper and catches our attention for our exam is about inclusion of 6 SC communities to grant 6 communities to grant SC status in Assam. That has been approved by the panel. So the key theme that has been discussed in this particular article is Assam has granted scheduled tribe status to 6 communities in the state, such as Koch Rajbanshi, Mattak, Moran, Tai, Ahom, T tribes, Adivasis, etc. In response to it, several protests by several other tribal organizations, which are existingly given SC status already, claiming that the inclusion would dilute their political identity and reservation benefits that they are receiving. So this is the whole context for it. If we have to clutter it from our exam perspective, it is relevant for GS paper 1 and GS paper 2, wherein social justice, polity and federalism can be linked. knowing about intersection of social justice, tribal rights, identity politics, state autonomy versus central norms. For prelims perspective, we need to know about understanding constitutional provisions with regard to scheduled tribe and scheduled caste, criteria for inclusion, process of amendment, implications for reservation. For mains perspective, the same is to be seen through the lens of challenges with regard to affirmative actions, demand for inclusion versus fear of dilution, identity, regional politics, politics of recognition, and balancing social harmony is the key challenge for state government and central government. This is how this particular article is to be seen. It not only requires inclusion or exclusion, it merely demands sensitive, evidence-based approach, balancing justice with social cohesion. This is how this particular article is to be seen. The next important article which is relevant for our exam is on editorials page, and this talks about the Kamalesan case and its simple lesson. This is in news nowadays. Reason being, an army officer has been refused and dismissed for refusing to enter temple or gurdwara for his regiment during mandatory parades, citing his personal religious beliefs and conscience. So this debate hovers around duty and discipline in the military versus individual conscience and religious freedom. So it is relevant for GS paper 2 under the theme polity and fundamental rights, wherein fundamental rights with regard to religious freedom and conscience versus restriction under special laws such as Article 33 for armed forces in particular has been talked. For prelims perspective, we need to know about articles and constitutional provisions about freedom of religion and special status being given to armed forces under Article 33. For mains perspective, the same is to be seen through the lens of moral constitutional conflict, institutional discipline, individual beliefs, and larger questions about pluralism, institutional tolerance, and state neutrality. So the key takeaway that we can take from this particular article is democracy must balance institutional necessity with individual conscience. Cases like this actually test constitutional values of tolerance, inclusivity, and dignity of an individual. But at what cost? Army is an institution which is supposed to be secular in nature, as per definition, and this is whether correct or incorrect with regard to personal conscience is to be debated. So the next important article that is there in the paper and catches our attention talks about enabling a modern and future ready labor ecosystem. So the key context of this particular article is about government has implemented a comprehensive labor reform by consolidating multiple labor laws into 4 broad labor codes, which covers wages, industrial relations, social security, occupational safety, and working conditions. Simply, the goal is to simplify and framework regarding unorganized gig sectors, platform sectors that ensures minimum wages, social security, safer workplace, and streamlined compliance. It is relevant for GS Paper 3, Indian economy and welfare measures, labor reforms, formalization of workforce, social security, ease of doing business versus workers' right. For prelims perspective, we need to know about basics of labor law, recent labor codes, definitions with regard to wage, working conditions, and gig workers. For mains perspective, the same article is to be seen through the lens of trade-off between economic growth and social justice, formalization of informal sector, challenges in implementation, implication for India's demographic dividend, and global competitiveness. The key takeaway from this particular article is about labor reforms can transform India's workplace, but real gains depends on ground level compliance, enforcement, and inclusion, especially with regard to informal, gig, and vulnerable workers. So this article is to be seen in this particular manner. The last important article, which is important for today's paper, is about why India's struggles to clean its air. This article majorly argues repeated resorts for short-term fixes for air pollution, such as smog towers, odd even water sprinkling, festival crackdowns, but it often fails to undermine long-term structural and institutional reforms that will even is very much important to get some sort of relief for this issue that we are seeing every year in news. The problems is majorly fragmented governance across multiple agencies, central, state, municipal, regulators, etc., and lack of unified authority, institutional gaps, and lack of interstate coordination as well. This is relevant for GS paper 3, wherein environment, disaster management, and urbanization challenges can be underlined. The main theme that is described in this particular article is about air pollution, governance failure, public health, environmental interface, climate adaptation, need for institutional reforms. For prelims perspective, the same is to see the several data that we have to revise is about air quality index, major pollutants in the form of PM 2.5, PM 10, etc., regulatory bodies such as CPCB, local pollution boards, urban environmental challenges. For May's perspective, the same is to be seen through the lens of why environmental governance in India remains weak, structural institutional reforms versus ad hoc measures that we are trying to plug the problem with, need for sustainable context-sensitive policy, and balance between development and environment. This is all for my and for today's Hindu newspaper analysis. Till we meet for the next time, take care, goodbye, keep learning, keep growing.